It was probably when I was about 3 or 4 years old, and we were in the USA. I don't remember too much about the USA, I just remember having this Charlotte Hornets hat, snapback, I think it was teal and purple, and look back at a lot of my photos and I was sort of wearing that hat in everything. So it's gone for a long time. I love a pair of hats. Yeah, RJ Streetwear, it's sort of, well, it's a streetwear brand. We sell flat brim caps, snapback caps, fitted caps, and pretty much have licenses for most of the Super Rugby teams and selling their hats for them. It sort of started, yeah, it started when I was at the Force, and I read a book. It was called The 4 Hour Work Week, and I read it on a plane flight from Sydney to Perth. It was that good that I just finished it. I didn't put it down. One of the things he says in the books is about getting your muse, which they talk about an online store and a product that you want to sell and a niche in the market. And I was sort of sitting in bed in Perth and going, I want to do something. What can I do? What do I like? And I was at the end of the bed, and I was always a bit of a hat fanatic. I had all my hats sort of lined up at the end of my bed, and they were all American hats. And I sort of just went, that's it. I love rugby, I love hats. Put them together. I've always wanted to do hats for Australian sort of teams, and the next day went into the Force and started talking about licensing. Well, you got to start with obviously the licensing. So once I dealt with all that, then I was looking into designing, and I didn't know too much. I mean, my degree's in law, and I'm a professional rugby player, so the internet's a wonderful thing these days, so you can sort of learn anything on the run. So I decided to sit down and decide to learn how to be a designer. So I mean, there was also the step I had to create a business, a company, logos for my company. From the designs, then you obviously go through manufacturing, which is all outsourced these days, and I just got a ton of samples at the start there from so many different manufacturers and found the ones I liked, and then got relationships, and then just went from there. Obviously here we've got my pride and joy. He's a bit dirty because he's been through the wars, but my Pirates hat was my first sort of venture into clubland, and we've got a few club teams going now, but it's probably my favourite design as well. I mean, they gave me free license on design, which is always nice. Like I said, he's a bit dirty now, but I love him. I wear him probably the most, because no matter where you go, you're always a pirate. This one here, again, is a special one for me. It's the Nathan Sharp limited edition hat, and I did this sort of run when it was his last game from the Force, which was I was lucky enough to be a part of, and Sharpie was very grateful, and he was very good to me in signing him. I remember him lying on the massage bed, getting his hammies rubbed, and then I had a whole bunch of hats under him, and he was just signing one after the other in preparation for his last game. Obviously the price was increased for these hats, and I didn't know how they would sell, but at that last game at the ground they sold out before kick-off, so it was a good run, and it was testament to who Sharpie was as a player, because everyone wanted one. This one is a prototype that I got made up with Scott Higginbotham. Sort of came out with this name down in Melbourne, the Melbourne Misfits. So it's probably my first unlicensed product, and into a bit of a different sort of range of hats, obviously with the corduroy and the leather. It's very trendy down in Melbourne, so it was something different. We've got 126 on the back, that's 12 and 6, my number and his number, to sort of mark our collaboration. And again, it's another hat that I really love and enjoy and wear often. It's a hard one. I mean, sometimes it gets very busy with the business. There are particular times of year, obviously coming around to the start of the season, it's extremely busy. And sometimes it was tough to balance. There were a couple of days in pre-season where I just wasn't quite myself because things weren't going right in the business. So it was stressful on the business side of things, which did flow on a bit to my training for a couple of days, but I mean, Richard Graham at the time was very helpful, and he sort of sat me down and said, we're going to want to try and get this. I like what you're doing, but we don't want it to affect rugby, and I never wanted it to either. So he's just sort of said, come to me if anything's wrong, if anything's like that, and so we can balance things. But from then I sort of with that help, and there's help from obviously the development officers, which makes balancing it a lot easier, I'd say go for it. I mean, you don't realise how lucky you are sort of in rugby, because it's a demanding industry, but at the time you do have a lot of free time. I mean, right now, working as a lawyer, if I wanted to start up a business now, it'd be nearly impossible, just because you're working from 8 till 6. So you do get that spare time, and there are time, and you want to get away from rugby. You need to unwind, because you can't be thinking about it 24/7. So I found that while at the start there was some times when I was demanding, at the end it was helping me, because I had a release. I could get away. There was something I could think about. If things weren't going great at rugby, I could switch off at times and focus on something else. So I think in the end, when I did learn to balance it, it helped my rugby, and at the same time, playing rugby helps your business. So it's not a bad time to start a business if you have an idea. I think the opposite. It's a great time, because you have the security from rugby, and you can have a crack at something else you might be interested in.